My name is Emmett Thaxton, and I live in Dallas, Texas, and lived here all my life, and I'm retired.
Tell me about your first memories of radio.
Well, my first memory was a small radio that my parents bought, I guess, back in the 1920s. And I was fascinated by it in that there was a little box sitting on the table, and it would play music and talk to you. And I didn't really think too much about it until later on. I got into high school, and I had a couple of friends there that were ham radio operators, and I used to go to their house and watch them operate these things. And the idea that you could talk into a piece of gear and your voice would come out over a speaker somewhere else on the face of the earth was sort of a fascinating concept for me, and I guess it's remained so all my life. It just never has left me.
What specific programs do you remember from when you were little?
I don't remember any on the radio. Well, the first ones I don't remember anything about, but there were some Vic and Sade was a kind of a comedy program that was on. It was on every day, I think, and I don't really remember the names of those things too much from early radio.
Yeah. Did you hear the Orson Welles 1938 broadcast of War of the Worlds?
Yeah, I did.
What was your impression?
I thought it was at the time it was just a hoax. Not a hoax in that he was trying to perpetrate a hoax, but I thought it was just a program. I didn't take it seriously.
Sure. Did you read then about in the papers that a lot of people did take it seriously?
Oh, yeah. It's been on television. I think they've rebroadcast the program in its entirety, and then they went into aspects of what different people did in different parts of the country. Yeah, a lot of them did take it seriously.
How then did you get into radio later?
Well, I guess through these fellows in high school, they're the ones that really whetted my interest in it. And then after I got into the Army, I went into the Army Air Corps in 1942, and they sent me to basic training at Camp Kearns, Utah. And there they gave us a battery of tests to determine if we would qualify for a technical school. And one of the schools was radio operators and mechanics. And so I thought, well, that would be something that I would really be interested in. And so that's the one that I selected. And I got sent to Scottsville, Illinois to study radio. And there they had 3 sessions of classes each day. They ran around the clock, and I was on the graveyard shift. I went to school from 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock the next morning. And half of that time was devoted to learning and increasing your speed in the Morse code, and the other half was studying radio theory and studying the different types of radios that were used by the Air Corps.
Did you, when later on in the actual war, did you ever use Morse code, or was it all voice?
No, I never did use it. I used voice most of the time. After I left the Air Force, I went into the field artillery. I went to OCS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and from there they sent me to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and to train in an armor division. And there they used frequency modulated radios. And then again they sent me to school at Holabird Signal Depot in Baltimore, Maryland, to study these particular radios, how to replace tubes and minor maintenance on them, and also how they operated. And so when I got back, then I had to teach a school to the other people there in the operation of these radios.
Was your exposure then in the early 40s to FM with the military, was that the first time that you had ever been exposed to FM technologies?
Yeah, that's the first I'd ever heard about it. And they used it, I think, in field artillery because it was a sort of a line-of-sight transmission, and we were operating over short distances, and you could get a clearer voice image over the air clearer than you could by AM.
So then, when you were deployed, where did you go?
Well, when I left the States, I went over to Europe and was in the Third Army. And I was involved in the Battle of the Bulge, and then all the way across Luxembourg, France, and Germany. And when the war ended, I was in Czechoslovakia.
What did you do?
I was a forward observer with the field artillery, and my job was to go with the infantry units and direct artillery fire where it was needed, and that was when we used the FM radios. Radio was a pretty heavy piece of equipment back then. It was broken down into two parts. Half of it was the radio transmitter and receiver, and the other part was the battery pack. And I had two men that went with me on these forward observation missions to carry this equipment. And this same equipment was used in the airplanes. When I was not with the infantry, I was flying in a Cub airplane. It's called an L4, and directing artillery fire from the air. And the same radios were used in the planes.
So did you have binoculars and you were watching the target?
Well, when I was on the ground, I was using binoculars. From the plane, I was picking out targets, but I didn't use binoculars from the plane. No.
Sure. And then you would call out then. What did you do then? How did it work?
Well, the radios were tied into the fire direction center, and I would spot targets and then identify the target, usually on a map that I had in the plane. It was the same map that they were using in Fire Direction Center. So then they would lob one round over near the target, and I would sense the round with relation to the target. That is, I'd say it was 300 yards over or 200 yards left. And then they would make the corrections to bring the fire onto the target.
I see.
And after they adjusted one gun, then depending on the size of the target, we might bring a battalion of artillery on it at the same time.
I see. Did obviously this came into play a whole lot in the later wars. Did you ever see any sign of like the German army using any sort of like FM scrambling or blocking or anything to try to interfere with broadcasts?
Not that I could tell. It didn't interfere with ours. We were moving so fast. I was with the Third Army, and we were pretty mobile. And we were usually with the Fourth Armored Division, and we would drive these spearheads into the German lines, and then the whole unit would coil, kind of like in the old days with the wagon trains, and then we would strike out again from that position. And so we were so mobile that I guess they couldn't really zero in on us too much.
Sure.
So we had no problem with scrambling.
Was everything that you did with the voice transmission, was it all just in plain text, or did you have code words and things like that you used?
Well, it was in plain text, the sensing of these rounds. When we would identify targets, they had a thing called measle points, and they would have a bunch of predetermined points on the map, and you would identify your target according to them. You say target and identify it as tanks or infantry or Nebelwerfers or whatever you were firing on near measle point 22.
I see. So then France was finally liberated, and the war ended after Hitler committed suicide and so on and so forth. What did you do then? Well,
I went into part of military government. We were assigned a certain area in Germany that we had to patrol, and I had to go around to the various burgomeisters in all the little towns and get information from them. I needed to know what the water supply was, what the food supply was in those towns, who the prominent citizens were there any displaced persons there that needed to be moved out, and that sort of information. and reported it back.
Were you able to speak German?
No, I had an interpreter that went with me, and this was a German, and he spoke 6 languages.
Wow.
And when I was there, he had a child born, and I said, "What languages are you going to teach the child?" He said, "All of them." So he was pretty good at it. He spoke German. Of course, a lot of these languages are related, like Polish and Russian and Czech. I think if you can speak one, you can pick the others up pretty easily.
I see. So then, how did you then get back from Europe, and what happened then?
Well, I was stationed. My final destination was Straubing, Germany, which is on the Danube River, and so I got a call to that I was going to leave and go back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to be an instructor. And I was pretty fortunate there in that I got out before a lot of the other people. They were going to break up our unit and send us, I guess, home piecemeal. So I got out pretty early and went back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and stayed there until I got out of the Army. And after I got out, of course, I went back to school and finished my degree out at SMU, and then went to work. And all during the working years, I didn't think too much about radio. But then when I was getting ready to retire, I thought I need some kind of hobby. So I thought, well, radio has always been of interest to me. So I think what I'll do is try to get myself a amateur radio license. So I got some books on radio theory, and I bought some tapes of the Morse code in various speeds, and started a little study program for myself. And I took a tape recorder to work and left it there, and I would go in early every day and set aside about 30 minutes early in the morning to sit there and copy code. So after I got proficient enough, I thought I could pass the FCC exam, and I had studied enough theory, so I thought I could pass that portion of the exam. I went over to the FCC and took the test and got a general class ham radio license.
What's your call letters?
My call is WD5HRK.
And that's something they assigned, or do you get to pick
the
that?
FCC assigns all these calls to you.
I see. So then what, you've got a big antenna and a radio. What all do you have there that you use?
Well, I've got a transceiver that I bought. It's a Kenwood transceiver, and it's capable of putting out 100 watts. But I have an amplifier which enables me to put out a signal of 2,000 watts. And I have, I have a, what do I have here? I had a backup receiver, but I gave it to a guy. And I've got a 2-meter rig here in the house, and I've got one in the car that I can transmit and receive from stations in and around the Dallas area. And I've got 2 antennas. One is a vertical antenna, and one is a beam antenna that shoots a directional signal, and that's the one I use on the long-distance stuff. My main interest has been in what the hams call DX, or distance, long distance. The farthest I can transmit, the better I like it. And I've talked to possibly every place in the world. I guess they were talking the other day on the radio about landing our planes in Diego Garcia. Well, I've talked to hams in Diego Garcia.
Wow.
So you really learn a lot of geography by being a ham operator. But it's a fascinating hobby. There's several things that have come up during the years. For example, I was at, as I said before, in Straubing, Germany, before I came back from overseas. And one day when I was operating my ham set here at home, I contacted a station in Straubing. And so I was asking the fellow about the town, and he said, well, when I was there, that it was an agricultural area predominantly. But since the war, it had become industrialized, and the city had just about doubled in size. And so he sent me a brochure through the mail later on of Straubing, but it had changed so that I didn't recognize anything. But it was interesting being able to talk back to the city where I had been at one time.
Sure.
Another thing is I contacted a guy in Luxembourg. I spent, during the war, quite a bit of time in Luxembourg. We were trying to get across the Saar River into the Siegfried Line. And I was telling this fellow about it, and people in Luxembourg apparently have a great appreciation for what the Americans did for them in getting back their country for them. So he sent me some pictures that a fellow had painted, some charcoal-type pictures of war scenes, and he sent me a great big map of Luxembourg, which is very detailed. I was certainly glad to get that. And I was talking to a guy one day in Hawaii, and found out that he had also been at Scott Field at one time. And he was talking about a sign that was over the gate that said, through these portals pass the best radio operators in the world. And I had a picture of that, so I took a photograph of it or made a copy of it and sent it to him, and he was glad to get that. Also, another thing that ham radio did was I worked with a fellow whose son was in the Marine Corps and was a medic stationed in the Antarctic. And so I was able to contact McMurdo Station in the Antarctic and get in touch with his son and patch him in through the telephone. I've got a phone patch here that I use. And so he was able to talk to his son down there at McMurdo. We did that a couple of times.
That's fantastic. So there was no other way that he could, he couldn't, there was no phone service down there to call?
Apparently not.
Huh.
And another thing I did was another one of these fellows, both of these guys I kept up with that I first got interested in ham radio through in high school. And one of them was working as a civilian engineer at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I made contact with him, and we had a regular weekly schedule, and I was able to, he had 4 sons, and I was able to patch him into his sons every week so he could keep up with his family here. And that went on for about 2 years. And I think that it was interesting for me because I wanted to know whether the atmospheric conditions or propagation would allow us to be able to contact that frequently. But there was only one time, I think, during that 2-year period that we did not make contact.
So can you go further with the radio when it's overcast or when it's clear?
It really doesn't make much difference because these signals, other than the local static and that sort of thing, these signals bounce off the ionosphere. So the local conditions really don't make a whole lot of difference.
I see. What's in distance terms? What's the furthest point you've ever contacted?
I guess India, or well, I've contacted Australia. That may be one. I've been into Japan, all the Scandinavian countries, all the countries in Europe practically. I've talked to Saudi Arabia. That was not a local there, though. It was a radio station operated by one of the oil companies here in the States.
I see.
But practically anywhere in the world, a lot of islands, all kinds of islands, and Far East, I've been there.
Yeah. Well, I guess help us understand then a little bit, because in most of us, the only experience we've ever had with radio is maybe turning a dial and probably just punching in the number in the car.
Yeah.
So how does this work? What do you do?
Well, you just get on whatever frequency you're going to operate on, and of course the frequencies are, the span of the frequency is limited by the FCC and your license. So if you don't have a schedule with somebody, you just get on there and listen. And you might hear one guy calling, he'll call CQ, which means that I'll talk to anybody that'll answer me. So if you want to talk to him, you just call him back, because when you're turning your dial, your transmitter is also zeroing in on him. So a transceiver, you can get the transmission and the reception on the same frequency. So you can just call him up, and chances are he'll come back to you and you can talk. I was tuning one day and found a guy in Bonnybridge, Scotland, and started talking to him, and we seemed to hit it off. So we talked for quite a while, and then I heard him the next week, so we finally set up a weekly schedule, and over a period of about 7 or 8 years, I talked to him practically every week. And so then when propagation was such that we couldn't make contact over the radio, we would send letters back and forth. So I really made a good friend in Bonnybridge, Scotland, just by fooling with ham radio.
Have you ever seen a picture of him?
Oh, yeah. He sent me pictures of himself, his home, and his wife. And he also sent me a bunch of pictures of Dallas, Scotland. There's a town in Scotland named Dallas, and he sent me a bunch of pictures of that. So yeah, we've had a real good correspondence through the years.
Do you the idea of just tuning through the different frequencies until you find somebody, or just listen and see if you see somebody that you want to talk to? It reminds me a lot of the chat rooms now on the internet.
Kind of the same, yeah.
Some of the people on the chat rooms, though, are pretty mean and obnoxious. Do you ever run into that, or is most everybody pretty good-natured?
Well, they're pretty good-natured. You run into some people that are kind of obnoxious, but normally they're a ham bunch is a pretty good bunch of people. I've enjoyed talking to them. This other fella that I was in high school with, is now living in Sun City, Arizona. And he and I have a weekly schedule. So I talk to him every week. And so that's kind of interesting. Those two guys that were ham operators in high school, I still keep up with now.
Wow, that's really wild.
It's been interesting for a lot of people. Some of the names that you might know, Barry Goldwater, Senator Goldwater. Mm-hmm. He's now dead, but he was a ham operator. Mm-hmm. And Chet Atkins, the guitar player, mm-hmm. he's also dead, but he was a ham operator. Mm-hmm. Tex Beneke, who played with Glenn Miller's band, was a ham operator. Ronnie Millsap, who was in country western music, plays piano and sings. He's a ham, and Walter Cronkite has a ham license.
Wow. I have one of the students in my class. He's probably about 24. He has his license, and I know a couple other people that are that age that have it. But do you see? Is it largely an older group of people?
It's both. It seems like most of the people now are people that got into it as young kids and have stayed with it all these years. So a lot of the older people in it have been hams for 50 years. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of those. I think they are worried now about not being able to attract new hams into the sport or into the hobby because of all the other electronic equipment that's available. Mm-hmm. I guess it seems kind of silly to kids now to talk about having a 2-meter rig in your car and talking to hams in the city when you've got cell phones. So,
but it doesn't cost anything to use.
That's right. After you buy your initial equipment, it doesn't cost anything.
What kind of money would it cost to get into a very basic ham rig?
A couple of $1,000.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you had 2 different antennas at the house, one for around town and one for long range. How big are those?
Well, the vertical antenna is 50 feet tall, and the the beam antenna is, I have it up on a mast that I can extend up to 45 feet, but I have it down now at 36 feet. Mm-hmm. And it's, I guess the longest, it has 3 elements on it. The boom is 16 feet long, and the longest element is about 24 feet. So it's a pretty good size thing. It weighs about 60 pounds.
Wow.
But I have it on turning device that I operate from inside the house, and it shows me what the where the thing is pointing. That is the direct compass direction that it's pointing in.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on where I'm operating, if I'm operating in Europe, well, I'll point it in that direction, or turn it around and send it down toward Australia or New Zealand, somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a thing that I can turn around and aim this signal in a specific direction.
Uh-huh. Does ham stand for something?
Nobody seems to know. I've tried to research that, and they really don't know why. Some people have theories on it, but there's really, I don't know how the word ham got into it. And I've read several articles on it, and nobody seems to know for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Thaxton. We appreciate it very much.
It's a real fun sport. There are about 43,000 of us in Texas and about 715,000 in the United States.